resolution.
The next resolution, the report on the Select Commission on Emergency COVID-19 borrowing, adopted by resolution on September 22nd, 2020 by the issuing officials and transmitted to the Select Commission on Emergency COVID-19 borrowing that day in compliance with the New Jersey COVID-19 Emergency Bond Act, PL 2020, Chapter 60, for the purpose of issuing New Jersey COVID-19 General Obligation Emergency Bonds and for the sale of bonds by the issuing officials in the manner and subject to the conditions described in the report is approved by the Commission.
Thank you. There are 4 people who have indicated they wish to speak on it. Anthony Russo.
It's supposed to be green, right?
It's red.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to comment again. My name is Tony Russo. I'm president of the Commerce and Industry Association of New Jersey, based in Rochelle Park with an office here in Trenton. We represent about 900 companies from virtually every business sector. And I know we're here today to talk about the borrowing plan, but I just want to say that I know the budget was passed. It's sitting on the governor's desk. A lot of our members were stunned by what the budget included, the CBT tax and also the millionaire's tax. What concerns us about this borrowing, and when you look at how it's laid out and what the treasurer laid out, how the money is going to be spent, it was kind of confusing to us because we're not really sure how they arrived at those allocations, right? You have money for education, human services, NJ Transit, higher ed, and they seem to be fungible, and it's really not clear if you look at what the Supreme Court decided, that the money has to be used if you're going to borrow for lost revenues associated with COVID-19. The other concern that I know a lot of our members asked me, and hopefully we can get some clarification on it, is the state and the governor hasn't really spent the $2.5 billion that the CARES Act money gave to the state. I know that that's something that has been at least identified where it would go, and again, there seems to be a lot of overlap with how this borrowing is going to happen versus how that money is going to be spent. And in a nutshell, I could tell you that the budget itself is very confusing. It's not easy to read as far as trying to track the money, and it just seems that more can be done in order to provide clarity. And I won't take too much time, but I'll just kind of wrap up by saying that in talking to a lot of our members, they're telling me, Tony, when you look at fiscal year 2020, right, and I'm going off of the calendar year, first quarter, second quarter are okay. The second quarter, the PPP monies are going to carry people over. It's really the third and fourth quarter that we're going to be in for that surprise, right? The revenues are going to be down. And as one business owner told me, before I go out and take out a loan, I have to be able to generate the revenue to pay for that loan. So in essence, what the state's doing here is going to borrow $4.5 billion when the revenues are projected to go down. It's going to be a tricky year come April's surprise next year. And so we hope that at the end of the day, the legislature votes no to borrow the $4.5 billion. That's it.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Russo? No? Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Christopher Imigolds?
Good afternoon, Speaker Coughlin. Good afternoon, Senate President Sweeney. Good afternoon, Chairman Sarlo and Chairwoman Pinto-Rin. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today about the borrowing in front of you. On behalf of NJBIA, that represent members across the state that employ about 1 million people in this state, we are concerned about this level of borrowing. We're concerned, number one, because we don't think it's necessary. BIA has tried to be very balanced throughout this process. We've never asked for an austerity budget where you slash spending and taxes. We think spending on good things like innovation, workforce development, infrastructure are needed in this state, and they stimulate the economy. We're worried that the more borrowing you do, the less opportunity you have for spending on education, workforce, infrastructure, NJ Transit, innovation, things that we know will help our economy, help our businesses that are hurting right now. We think that the level of surplus in this budget, we think that the revenue projections in this budget, and we think that the new spending that was inserted into this budget that have nothing to do with the crisis at hand all show that this level of borrowing is not necessary. And so we hope that this panel and the legislature as a whole can do everything possible to limit that borrowing as the fiscal year advances. If revenues turn out to be closer to the OLS projection or even rosier than that, hopefully that can reduce the level of borrowing and get to that less debt service that we all want. If federal relief comes in a new form before the election, after the election, from President Trump or President Biden, hopefully we can use that to reduce the level of borrowing and not for new spending. And I point to the op-ed this weekend, Senate President Sweeney's op-ed. If the structural reforms that are needed in the state do happen and we save some money this fiscal year, again, we use that savings to reduce borrowing and for no new spending. And hopefully that $4.5 billion goes down, our future debt service over the next 12 years as proposed goes down, and our taxpayers will benefit from that. So thank you.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions? If not, look, I think we all share your hope that there's money that comes from Washington or that revenues are better than not. The borrowing plan allows for us to pay down the borrowing as quickly as possible. So I think we're largely in that regard on the same page. But thank you for your testimony. Hillary Chopra?
Thank you, Speaker Coughlin, and good afternoon, Senate President Sweeney, Chairman Sarlo, and Chairwoman Printer-Moran. My name is Hillary Chebra. I am the Manager of Government Affairs for the South Jersey Chamber of Commerce, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify on the proposed issuance of the $4.5 billion in general obligation bonds. The longstanding impact of the borrowing cannot be understated, adding to the state's already enormous debt, which can only lead to higher taxes on an already overburdened residents and businesses. The CCSNJ acknowledges the fact that some borrowing may be necessary to address the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in New Jersey. However, it should be done only after every other option has been exhausted and with due consideration to the long-term impact of the state's fiscal health. There are several options worth considering outside of borrowing, but it should be done on a short-term basis and not spread over many years, adding to the enormous amounts of debt service to the state's bottom line. New Jersey is already one of the most indebted states in the nation, and should the $4.5 billion in borrowing be approved, it will come with an extraordinary high levels of interest that would take years to pay off on the backs of New Jerseyans. It is quite likely that this level of borrowing will cause New Jersey to receive a downgrade in credit and fiscal outlook. So we just ask that you keep these factors in mind while voting on the proposed issuance, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions? Thank you very much. Ravinder Chopra? Mr. Chopra had indicated that he was not in favor and not opposed, but did wish to testify. So, Ravinder Chopra. Are there any comments by members? Senate President Sweeney.
Before we vote, hopefully something happens federally, and I think all of us here expect that there is federal funds that we would reduce the amount of borrowing. It's unfortunate we're in this situation, but we're at a place in a time where it's not in New Jersey that I'm used to. Masks, distance, huge budget deficits, probably one of the worst ones that we can anticipate coming forward. I put an op-ed in the press the other day for one reason. I'm serious that we need to at least address a lot of these reforms that have long been waiting. New Jersey has a lot of problems. It's no secrets, and these are hard problems to fix, but we got to get serious with the finances of the state. Not that we weren't before, but we got to get serious with fixing some of the structural problems here. So I heard the testimony from the three people. They're right. These are tough times. We have to be very judicious with borrowing, and we have to make sure if we get better numbers, if things improve, that we reduce the amount of money or it goes to reduce the borrowing. Because I don't think any of us really want to see this borrowing. We're just in a place where we don't know where we're at. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you.
Anyone else? If not, I'll just say that I think I share the view. I think that we all probably share the view of, as I noted before, that we're hopeful that that the revenue figures will be strong, that the assistance from Washington will come, and allow us to minimize the amount of money we borrow. In my mind's eye, I think of this more as a line of credit than as a mortgage. And we'll borrow it all, but without having to take it if we can avoid it. But I think we need to be prepared. We don't know what the future holds. If we have, as some public health models indicate, have a return of the COVID-19, perhaps as severe or even more severe than in the spring, we need to be prepared. That would come most likely at the worst time for us in terms of revenue, right? It comes during the holiday shopping period. It would have a profound impact on sales tax and would have a profound impact on the seasonal employment that generally goes on. So in order to be prepared, you need to be prepared. You need to do things ahead of them occurring. So I think that's what we have done under circumstances that none of us had ever anticipated we would face. As we've said before, we can't tax our way out of it or cut our way out of it. So we've come up with a balanced approach that does a little bit of that and relies on borrowing as a key component. Chairman Sarlo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My comments will be brief and echo what I had said on the day of the floor vote for the budget. Clearly, the budget that we had just passed last week, that I believe will be signed into law by the governor tomorrow, clearly takes into consideration if the economy does not rebound the way we're all hopeful it does, that second wave that you just spoke about. I sort of look at it almost like a two-year budget. There's revenues in here from the borrowing, which will allow us to be prepared as a state to continue to fund the most critical portions of our government. But as I also did say, whether you call it a tipping point or not, I believe collectively as the legislature, we're hopeful that federal funds will come in, especially after we get through a presidential election. Any of those monies that do come into the state, whether it's in the way of CARES money being more released or other types of relief to states, that money should be used to, not for new programs, but to be used to pay back this borrowing. And we are hopeful together, collectively, in a bipartisan manner, any reforms that we do work on and we do achieve a savings, the savings that will go towards reducing our structural deficit, those monies also should be applied to pay back this debt and not make any further expansion of programs. Fund education, fund higher education, fund our hospitals, but at the same time go back to paying debt. So I just think we need to be mindful of that we have an obligation, as you said, to pay back this line of credit sooner than later.
Thank you. Chairwoman Pinto-Marin.
Yes, I think that, Senate President and Speaker Coughlin, Senator Sarlo, I think that the four of us here are probably the four least legislators that would have liked to raise taxes, and we felt that it was a tough decision that we had to make, and we made it in preparation for next year and to be helpful towards the end of the year. Let's not make a mistake as we start to see more and more headlines in the news where kids are having to go virtual because someone has tested positive. This will be back, and I think it'll be back strongly. As you saw, CDC today said that this is far from over, and we need to make sure that the state is prepared to handle what's ahead of them. It's a very tough decision that we have to make. I don't think any of us wanted to be here today to allow for $4.4 billion to be borrowed. But as Speaker Coughlin said, I think this is just to be able to prepare us and to put us in a better place that we have money in reserves when needed to make the decisions that we need to make, and to make sure that the state is in a prudent and a fiscal manner in order to keep the economy going and to make sure that there's vital services that continue to happen. That's it, Speaker.
Thank you. Seeing no other indication they'd like to speak, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the resolution. Is there a second? May I have a roll call?
On a motion to adopt Resolution 02-2020, Senate President Sweeney?
Yes.
Votes yes. Assembly Speaker Coughlin?
Yes.
Votes yes. Senator Sarlo?
Yes.
Votes yes. Assemblywoman Pinter-Morin?
Yes.
Votes yes. Resolution is adopted.
Thank you.